It is hard to believe we are entering the last stretch of September, especially considering that it still feels like March, and people in positions of power are still conducting themselves as if it's March. But we are in the end of September, and so I wanted to provide my monthly sort of roundup of information about the Japan travel ban and where we stand. So I guess to get right into it, the first development this month, which of course started from the first of the month, is that, at least in theory, all foreign residence cardholders are allowed back in Japan, irrespective of where they come from or why they left and when they left. Now, of course, this is in theory. In practice, it's a little bit more complicated. So I guess the broader issue is that, unlike Japanese people who just turn up at the airport from wherever they're coming from, get their PCR test, and go to their quarantine place for 14 days, foreigners need to have a PCR test administered within 72 hours of arrival in Japan. So that's already sort of an inequity. And then in addition to that, it needs to be one of a few different types of PCR tests, and others are not valid. A woman from Dalian, China found that out the hard way. I guess she had a nasopharyngeal swab, which is not allowed. No, she had a throat swab, so you need to get a nasopharyngeal swab, and she had some other kind of swab. She got to the airport, I guess in Narita, I believe, and she was turned back and then deported. And she was a student, so she didn't have a lot of money, so I don't know what her situation moving forward is going to be. So she was deported from Japan because she had the wrong negative test result. And then there was a person from Norway, I guess, who on their test certificate, they had the right type of test done. They didn't have COVID-19, but because they were not detected instead of negative, they got deported. And so the issue seems to be twofold. There seems to be the structural issue that foreigners are treated differently from Japanese, which at this point I don't know why that surprises anybody. And then there seems to be this specific idea that really, irrespective of the larger rule or law, it's up to the discretion of each immigration officer, and I guess their ability to read and comprehend English. So that's really unfortunate. So in the larger picture, all foreign permanent residents rather, are theoretically allowed back in Japan, but in reality that's not necessarily the case. Now, on a kind of smaller note, these residence track bilateral agreements between Japan and several countries have expanded. So it was just Thailand and Vietnam prior to this month, and I guess now it's Taiwan and Brunei and some other Asian countries primarily that have low rates of infection. And then between Singapore and Japan, there was what's called a business track opened up, which allows short-term business travelers who are willing to jump through about 500 hoops to come to Japan for short stays. Now, the number of people who are going to be able to take advantage of these arrangements, I think, is probably going to end up being pretty small because of all the hoops they have to jump through, and because of the fact that it is not only restricted to certain categories of would-be residents, but is also at the moment restricted to nationals of XYZ country residing in XYZ country on direct flights from XYZ country. So I think the pool of people who would benefit this is really small to begin with, and then because of all the other gobbledygook that someone can encounter along the way, I think the number of people who are able to avail this will probably be in the dozens or the hundreds at most. But then the other sort of development, which actually just occurred a few days ago and didn't really get a lot of attention in the English language press, was right after the new Prime Minister, Suga, was sworn in. There was a press conference very late at night on Wednesday, the 16th of September, and each of the new, and in some cases returning cabinet ministers spoke, and Foreign Minister Motegi spoke. And I'm going to read directly what he said, the English translation, because my Japanese is bad, and I don't want to decrease my chances of being admitted when my time comes by butchering their wonderful language. But what he said, the English translation, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is, going forward, to put the economy on track for recovery, I believe it is important to allow resumption of cross-border travel in a way that also prevents the spread of the novel coronavirus. That's not new. What is new is this part. From the perspective of preventing the spread of the novel coronavirus thus far, we have raised the warning level on infectious disease levels. However, going forward, we will advance efforts toward allowing resumption of cross-border travel by considering lowering the levels. So this is huge. It's potentially huge. It's not necessarily huge, and I'll get into the weeds. I love getting into the weeds, as you can see with the plants behind me. I'll get into the weeds of that in a minute, but it's potentially huge because basically what we have right now, and I sort of touched on this earlier, but with this business track and residence track, these complicated bureaucratic bilateral agreements that Japan has struck with all these countries so far, you have these really particular individuals and situations that are basically getting an exemption from the entry ban. And legally, the way that the entry ban works is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whenever they raise the infectious disease alert level of a given country to level 3, there are 4 levels in Japan, 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest, whenever that goes up to level 3 for a certain country, the Justice Ministry denies what's called the landing permission to people who have spent 14 days in that country. So back in May, when Motegi first started discussing the idea of lifting the entry ban, myself and I think a lot of other people thought that as the infectious disease situation dictated, they would end up lowering these levels from a level 3 to a level 2 for certain countries and regions. And then people would be allowed in that way. Now, they would still have to take a test and quarantine, I guess, but the idea would be that the ban would be fully relaxed whenever it was relaxed for a country. Then Motegi started talking about this phased resumption of travel with business people, students, tourists, we all know the line right now. So I had sort of given up hope of this latter approach happening, which again, to get down in the weeds of it, is that when the infectious disease alert level for a certain country goes down from level 3 to level 2, then in principle anyway, the Justice Ministry would reinstate the landing permissions for that country, and anyone who is from that country that wants to come to Japan and is willing to test and quarantine, as Japanese people have to do, would be allowed to enter the country. And I think this is really exciting because this is the first time that Motegi has publicly mentioned this possibility. And I think it's notable because, of course, this was at the press conference that's sort of outlining the agenda for the new administration. And one of the things that I've noticed in the sort of commentary about Prime Minister Suga so far is that because he has to have a general election before September of 2021, he doesn't really have a lot of time to waste, and he's been moving really expeditiously. So, for example, another priority of the Abe government that never ended up coming to fruition was the establishment of a digital agency. And Suga very ambitiously has stated that he now wants to have that operational by early 2022. So, it's a 4-day weekend in Japan right now, and I guess that the people tasked with assembling that agency are already getting to work, digging the foundation for that. And so, again, I'm really getting down in the weeds. I'm really doing a lot of commentary and analysis because, there's not enough of that in our world today. But I do think that it's notable that in what is a relatively short press conference, and I'll link the English and Japanese versions below, he specifically mentioned this. And I think in particular, the language that he says with regard to that, he talks about going forward, we will advance efforts toward allowing resumption of cross-border travel by considering lowering the levels. I think maybe what he's acknowledging is the approach they've used so far, this business track, residence track, these super complicated bilateral agreements, they've not really been effective. Because the other thing I think Suga is really tasked with moving forward is, yes, managing coronavirus and making sure that there isn't any kind of third wave or fourth wave or whatever you want to call it, but he really wants to get the economy back on track. And then if you look more broadly, Suga has always been very, very pro-tourism. And now I'm not suggesting that tourists are going to start flooding in again if any of these levels are going to be reduced for certain countries, because I think most tourists don't want to quarantine for 14 days. But it could signal that Suga is more interested in actually getting the ball rolling and having a meaningful change in Japan's immigration policies. Because I think one of my major criticisms so far of these bilateral agreements, the business track, the residence track, is that they resulted in a lot of undeserved praise by the media for the actions of the Japanese government, in particular Foreign Minister Motegi, to progressively roll back the entry ban. But again, the number of people able to benefit from this was so low that it didn't change anything tangibly. It was just political self-congratulations. And I think that if going forward, and by going forward, I hope they mean starting in October. So here's the other thing. So typically, if you look at when restrictions have been added, i.e. when levels have raised from level 2 to level 3 and countries have been added to the entry ban, it typically occurs on the last Friday of a given month or the first Friday of the next month. So I'm hoping that on either September 25th or October 2nd, we're going to see some movement on this, maybe see 4 or 5 countries in Asia lowered down to level 2. But at any rate, I do think that Suga wants to push this forward more quickly. That's my thought. I don't necessarily have any solid evidence for that, and I know by this point we can't depend on any Japanese journalists to really push anybody on that. But I'll be really interested to see what happens over the next couple weeks. I learned long ago when it comes to the Japan travel ban not to be too optimistic, but you know, I guess anything is possible, right? And then the other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is not really a major immigration development, just as much as it is sort of a bigger picture type thing. So for a long time now, various people in Japan, mostly Japanese intellectuals and not administration officials, have been sort of telegraphing this idea that maybe the Olympics could be Japanese only. Not the athletes, but the spectators, that basically the only people allowed to watch in person would be citizens and residents of Japan, which is ridiculous for so many reasons. I think one of the former IOC chiefs even said it was antithetical to the spirit of the games, which it is. Absolutely ridiculous. And if that's on the table, in my opinion, the games should just be canceled altogether. But at any rate, it's been resurrected recently. There was an article in the Japan Times on Saturday that talked about, again, athletes being exempt from the entry ban, which sort of, if you read between the lines of that, it basically says that the entry ban is going to stay in place in some form, at least until the Olympics start next July. But as much of a skeptic as I've been on all of this, and as cynical as I've become digging down into the weeds of this for as long as I have to say I think those fears are somewhat unfounded, and I have a few reasons for thinking that. The first reason is with regard to a specific document that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a couple months ago, wherein they said that all certificates of eligibility, which is the document you need to apply for certain kinds of visas, are going to be extended either until the restrictions are lifted or April 30th, 2021, whichever comes last. And I don't know. I just have to believe that they intend, based on that at least for some countries and some categories of people, the restrictions are going to have been lifted in a somewhat meaningful way by next April. I don't think they pulled that date out of a hat. And the other thing, of course, and I think I touched on this in another video, I don't think they want to keep things closed until right before the Olympics, and then have no sort of experience, don't have the machine oiled at all, and just let masses of athletes even into the Olympics, and then risk having an outbreak and having the legacy of the games be marred by that. So I would say that I don't think that's going to happen, first and foremost for that reason. But the second reason, and again, this is sort of a bigger picture issue, but if you look at the progress of vaccine development, of vaccine procurement by various countries, and again, it's like Whitney Houston said, it's not right, but it's okay. It is conceivable to think that because of the vaccine purchases they have made so far, because of where the vaccines are in development right now, you have Pfizer saying they're going to have readouts by the end of October, Moderna by the end of November, AstraZeneca by the end of the year. Realistically, we are going to know one way or another whether one or more of these vaccines works by the first of the year 2021, and because of the stocks that rich countries have purchased, and this is where the it's not right but it's okay comes in, It is conceivable that citizens of rich countries who want to be vaccinated for the coronavirus will have done so by the middle of 2021. And logically, and again, they haven't always applied logic to the rolling back of this ban, logically it wouldn't make any sense for Japan to deny landing to anybody who has been vaccinated for the coronavirus, particularly if the vaccine ends up being 70% or more effective, which is not sterilizing, but you're probably not going to contract or transmit the virus if the vaccine is that effective. So I would say that the idea of not having any foreign spectators at all and having the entry ban still in place as it is today in July is not really realistic, because there even was some administration official. I didn't think it was the defense minister. I don't remember who it was exactly, but at that same press conference where Motegi talked about lowering the disease levels, he basically hinted that yes, once a vaccine becomes available, that's going to be a factor in whether or not someone is able to come to Japan. So I would say two things can be true at the same time, right? The idea of a Japanese-only Olympics is ridiculous and unacceptable and should lead to cancellation and humiliation of Japan on the world stage, in my opinion. But it can also be true that I don't see that happening, both because of Japan's comments on the extension of certificates of eligibility, and just the idea that I think health-wise, irrespective of where the pandemic is at that point, we're going to have hundreds of millions, if not billions, of vaccine doses available by then, and we're going to have hundreds of millions of people that have been vaccinated. So I think that's unfounded. I hope it's unfounded. So yeah, to recap, permanent residents are all allowed back in Japan, but not really. Business track and residence track have started for several different countries. Motegi discusses for the first time the possibility of lowering the infectious disease alert level for certain countries, which would remove the entry ban from those countries, and fears about the Olympics, I think, are largely overblown. So anyway, happy September, everybody. Happy end of September. I hope that by the time October comes around, we have some better news. I hope you're all doing well and taking care of your mental health, your physical health. And yeah, I'll keep making my videos. I'll keep doing what I do. And please keep watching. Please subscribe if you like this. Please leave a comment. Visit my website, japanstartshere.com, so on and so forth. Have a great day, and see you next time. All right, bye.